Imagine the cops rolling up to your house on a sunny Sunday because your backyard pool party is apparently a public menace. Not the music, not the screaming kids cannonballing, not even the 12-foot inflatable Grim Reaper doing lazy backstrokes on a flamingo raft. No, the floating skeletons in neon sunglasses and the fog machine rolling across the water like cheap horror movie smoke. That's what Deborah Deb Langley, president of the Cedar Grove Estates Homeowners Association, decided was disturbing the peace and violating community decency standards. I stood there in my flip-flops, half a burger still in my hand, staring at the two officers trying their hardest not to laugh, while Deb glared from across the street like I'd just sacrificed a goat on her perfectly manicured lawn. My name's Ryan Hale. Divorced dad, graphic designer, guy who turned his boring suburban pool into the coolest Halloween spot on the block for my 10-year-old daughter and every kid within 3 streets. Last year, Deb had already tried to shame me for the small home studio, appointments welcome sign in my yard, whispering to the whole neighborhood that I was turning Cedar Grove into a commercial slum and that a single dad running a business from home probably wasn't the best influence. I'd swallowed it, stayed quiet, kept my head down. But this was where dressed up as community standards. She marched straight into my yard without knocking, pearls so tight I swear they were cutting off oxygen to her brain. "Mr. Hale," she said in that honey-dripping voice she saves for board meetings, "these installations are in direct violation of Section 4, Paragraph 7b of our aesthetic guidelines. Skeletons are not seasonal decor. They're macabre displays of morbidity." Behind her, my daughter was making one of the skeletons dab. I offered Deb a cup of spice cider. She recoiled like I'd handed her rat poison. Accepting beverages from violators is unprofessional. Then she snapped photos of everything. The Reaper, the fog, even my dog wearing a tiny pumpkin cape that said "Boo Crew." "You'll receive a notice within 48 hours, she snapped, turning on her heel and tripping spectacularly over the extension cord. The zombie speaker let out a perfect groan. The cops lost it. I bit my tongue so hard I almost drew blood. 2 hours later, the sirens actually showed up. Officer Ramirez stepped out first, already grinning. Got a call about a disturbance? His partner was already filming the Grim Reaper on his phone. "Sir, in 12 years on the force I've seen some weird stuff. But floating skeletons doing the backstroke? This is a first." They walked the yard, radioed dispatch, laughed some more, and left with a "have a good one" and "nice party." Deb stood on her porch, phone still glued to her ear, face the color of a ripe tomato. I waved. She didn't wave back. That night the first email hit. Subject line: immediate compliance order, thematic offensive content. 18 photos attached like crime scene evidence. Daily fines started stacking. $50 for unauthorized aquatic inflatables, $75 for non-compliant atmospheric effects, $25 a day for inconsistent thematic lighting. My mailbox became a slot machine that only paid out guilt. By Wednesday, the total was pushing 400 and climbing. Neighbors split down the middle. The retirees with spotless lawns started calling themselves the Preservation Committee and photographing my yard like it was a crime scene. The kids and younger families started dropping by after dinner just to watch the next citation get taped to my door. I tried to stay polite. I really did. But every new fine felt like another little piece of joy being taxed out of existence. And somewhere in the back of my mind, the old rumors Deb had spread about me being unfit started echoing again. That's when I realized this wasn't about skeletons. This was about control. People like Deb can't control their own lives, so they control everyone else's, and they call it elevated tranquility. Funny how elevated tranquility always seems to come with a price tag and zero sense of humor. By Friday, I was done playing nice. I took every decoration down. The Grim Reaper deflated into a sad black puddle. The skeletons went into storage bins like they were being buried alive. Kids waved sadly from the sidewalk. One little boy asked if the skeletons had died again. I forced a smile and said they were just hibernating. But inside, something had snapped. That night, I sat by the empty pool with a beer and opened the 87-page HOA bylaws PDF for the first time in my life. Page after page of soul-crushing legalese. Then, buried in Section 12, subsection D, the golden ticket. Displays of a religious or cultural nature installed in recognition of seasonal or spiritual observances are exempt from aesthetic uniformity regulations. Halloween, Samhain to the ancient Celts, was literally about honoring the boundary between life and death. Spiritual observance incarnate. Deb's own rulebook had just handed me the nuclear option. I printed the page, highlighted it in neon yellow, and slapped it on my fridge under the words Article of Freedom. The next morning, I started rebuilding. Same skeletons, same reaper, same fog, but now each piece had a laminated plaque in fancy Gothic font. Symbolic guardian of the afterlife, veil between worlds, representation of spiritual transition. A big wooden sign at the pool gate read, Annual Samhain Exhibit, honoring the boundary between life and death. Cultural and spiritual display protected under Section 12D of Cedar Grove bylaws. Half the neighborhood came to watch. Phones came out. TikTok started. Across the street, Deb emerged like a storm cloud in linen pants, clipboard raised like a sword. Click, click, click. 30 minutes later, my inbox pinged. Abuse of religious exemption. I replied with the exact bylaw paragraph and the words, kindly direct any further inquiries to your legal counsel. Then I printed that email too and added it to the growing exhibit of folder. The meltdown emails started coming like clockwork. Spiritual fraud in Cedar Grove. Weaponizing tradition. Undermining community values. She CC'd the whole board, the county clerk, even a pastor 3 towns over. Replies poured in, half supportive, half asking if they could now celebrate Festivus on their lawns. I stayed silent, just like my retired lawyer neighbor Frank advised. Let her bury herself in her own words, he'd said, sipping coffee in my kitchen while we organized every screenshot and timestamp. Silence is gasoline to people like her. By Wednesday, the neighborhood Facebook group was pure chaos. Someone made a meme of Deb's face photoshopped onto a screaming skeleton. A petition to let the Reaper float free gained 300 signatures overnight. Local news accounts started tagging the post. And still I said nothing. I just kept adding tiny donation boxes labeled offerings for the departed, suggested donation, one smile. Someone left a Snickers bar. Another left a sticky note that read, Deb needs this more than the dead. Thursday brought the mandatory emergency HOA meeting. The clubhouse was standing room only. Popcorn was being passed like it was opening night at the movies. Deb stood at the front, pearls gleaming, projector showing a giant photo of my Reaper under the title, Evidence of Noncompliance. Her voice shook with righteous fury. This resident has exploited Section 12D to mock faith itself. I set my thick binder on the table with a soft thud. Before we begin, I'd like to confirm this meeting is being recorded for transparency. She smirked. Of course it is. I smiled back. Mine too. The door opened, in and walked Officer Ramirez, his partner, and City Code Enforcement Officer Rick Polson, clipboard in hand like a holy relic. Deb froze mid-rant. Rick cleared his throat. We received a report of spiritual fraud. Here to verify. The room lost it. Deb's face went crimson. I opened my binder and slid her a highlighted copy of Section 12D. Rick read it aloud like he was announcing a verdict. Then I hit play on my phone. The recording of Deb in my driveway 3 weeks earlier snarling, people like you don't win against people like us. The full unedited version. Phone shot up everywhere. Laughter turned to applause. Rick flipped through his own folder. Half these fines exceed your authority. We're opening an inquiry into the board's conduct. Linda Jacobs, one of the quieter board members, stood up. Deb, this has gone too far. You've turned us into a meme. Deb lunged for the mic. This is defamation. Rick just smiled. It's public record now. You called us. The vote was unanimous. Effective immediately, Deborah Langley was removed as president for misconduct and misuse of authority. She stood there clutching her clipboard like it was the last life raft on the Titanic while the room erupted in applause. Someone in the back yelled, "Guess the witch hunt's over." The laughter followed her out the door like a final fog machine blast. 2 days later, the Boulder Gazette ran the headline, After Poolgate, Cedar Grove HOA faces city audit. Turns out Deb had been quietly using association funds for her own rose garden. The irony was so perfect it hurt. She resigned citing emotional exhaustion. Linda took over and the first new rule was simple. Respect the rules, but actually read them first. I kept the Samhain exhibit up until mid-November. It got its own Google listing and a 5-star review that just said, "Came for the skeletons, stayed for the justice." Next October, the whole neighborhood is throwing the official Cedar Grove Halloween pool party. My daughter's already planning the playlist. Frank dropped by the other night, pipe in hand, and raised his mug. "You didn't just beat the HOA, Ryan. You converted it." I looked out at the Reaper still floating proudly and smiled. Sometimes the best revenge isn't screaming louder. It's letting everyone watch tyranny trip over its own fine print while the skeletons keep smiling. So tell me, was Deb right to enforce community standards? Or was the real violation her desperate need to control everyone else's joy? Drop your worst HOA Karen story below. Let's see who's got the craziest one. Because if there's one thing I learned, the monsters aren't the plastic ones floating in the pool. They're the ones clutching the clipboard.